There are two things I remember about kindergarten. The first was that the week before the first day of school, my mother drove me to the school to show me what route I would take to walk home. We lived a little less than a mile away from school. And I paid attention, I felt comfortable, I knew how to get home. And so the first day of school, my mother drove up to school, she let me out, she waved goodbye, I watched her drive away, and then I walked home. So my first day of kindergarten was actually the second day of kindergarten. The other thing I remember about kindergarten is I remember painting at an easel on the patio, and I was creating some, I don't know what it was, but I'm sure it was uniquely nuanced. And my teacher, Mrs. Johnson, came up to look at my painting, and then she vandalized it. With a black marker, she wrote my name, Christopher, across the top of the painting. Now, she wrote everyone's name on their painting, but I remember feeling upset. Because if I had wanted my name at the top of the painting, I would have put it there. What that did was that I remembered that when I became a teacher, and I never wrote a student's name on their piece of art. I would write it in pencil on the back, and then if I wanted to mount it on the wall, I would put it on a piece of construction paper and put their name on the construction paper. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, is taking the time to go back and remembering what happened to you during your school years, and what was memorable that you want to replicate in your classroom, and also what you might want to avoid in your classroom. I don't remember much about first grade. My teacher's name was Mrs. Cox, and she had an angry face. I know I had done something wrong, and as punishment, I had to sit on a stool in the corner with a dunce cap on my head. Now, this was a long time ago. This was back when principals still had paddles on their wall, and they were not there for decoration. Now, whether or not I actually had a conical hat on my head with the word dunce on it doesn't really make any difference. What I do remember is I was embarrassed in front of my peers, and of course that was the point. My teacher wanted to embarrass me so that I wouldn't do that again. But instead, it taught me to start caring less about what my peers thought about me. Second grade, that was a good year. We moved from Los Angeles to Pasadena. I got to walk to school again, much less than a mile. I met my best friend Jeff, and I had Mrs. McLaughlin. Mrs. McLaughlin did something interesting to reward students. She would place on a corner of their desk a rubbery, plasticky, monster creature animal thing, and that would remind the student that they had done something good that day. They had followed the rules. They had been productive. They had been a good citizen. And it showed other kids that, oh, I want to do something to earn one of those rubbery, plasticky animal things on my desk. When I was teaching fourth grade, I tried a version of this, and I placed on every student's desk a duck. A rubber duck. And if they made good choices, and if they followed the rules, they got to keep the duck, and the duck got to stay on their desk. If they made a poor choice, if they were disruptive, I would remove the duck, but they would have the opportunity to earn it back. At the end of the month, if the duck was still there, they got to keep the duck. The problem with this plan was that I had to buy a lot of rubber ducks. A ridiculous amount of rubber ducks. Some would say too many rubber ducks. Third grade. Jeff was in my class again. Had Mrs. Howard. The thing I remember most of Mrs. Howard was she smiled. She came to school and she looked like she wanted to be there. And because she wanted to be there, I wanted to be there. And that taught me that students know. They know whether you want to be there or not. They can tell. Which is why I retired when I did, because I didn't want to stay too long where the students would start being able to tell that I was no longer happy. Remarkably, Years later, I ended up teaching third grade in that very same classroom where I had been a third grade student. And I had a parent-teacher conference, and it went well, and the mother got up to leave to go to the door, and she was about halfway to the door, and she turned to me and she said, "Mr. Reagan, one more question. My son came home recently and said, well, he said you told the class that a man can make a lot of money dressing up like a woman." Oh, I said, I don't think I said that. I would remember that, but I didn't want to call her child a liar. And then I started doing some deducing in my head, and I thought I had figured it out. And I told the mom that recently an arts group had come into our class to introduce the students to classical music. And at the end of the session, they got to take home a CD. And it was a CD copy of a version of Peter and the Wolf. Now, this particular version happened to be narrated by Dame Edna Everage. And there was a photo of Dame Edna on the corner of the CD wearing her signature light purple wig and her sparkly cat's eye glasses and her dangly earrings. And I told the students that Dame Edna was actually an Australian comedian named Barry Humphries. And the reason I told them that was because at the time Finding Nemo was a popular movie, and I got to tell them that Barry Humphries was the voice of Bruce the Shark. Completely separate occasion. I just finished reading a picture book to my students, and one of my students said, "Mr. Reagan, you do such great voices. You should really do cartoons." And I said, "I would love to do cartoons because you can make a lot of money doing cartoon voices." So this mother's son went home and combined those two incidents to say, Mr. Reagan said a man can make a lot of money dressing up like a woman. You never know what a student is going to misremember. 4th grade, 1970. Passing the schools instituted busing in order to integrate the schools, so I went from walking down the street to a K-6 school to taking a bus across town to a 4th, 5th, 6th school. And what that meant for me personally was I went from being one of the shorter kids in my class to one of the shorter kids in my school. And I was teased, and I was made fun of. And on the first day of school, a 5th grader at the bus stop called me a fetus. And I had to wait all day to go home to ask my mother what a fetus was. But it gave me insight into what it meant to be bullied. And my response was twofold. The first is I developed a sense of humor. I discovered that if I made the joke about me being short before they did, I disarmed them. And my second approach to deal with being bullied was I became a bully myself. Not a physical bully, but I was an intellectual bully. I would say things that other kids couldn't understand. I would use words I knew they didn't know. And I also was a materialistic bully. I would break crayons and pencils and chocolate bars from students' lunches of students I knew would not retaliate. And because I had that experience being a bully and being bullied, I used that as a teacher. And I had empathy for the kids on either side of that equation. And it seemed to me for a couple of years there, I had a number of shorter than average young men who were bullies. And there was one year I had this young man in 5th grade. He had a tough life. His father would promise to take him places on the weekend and do things with him, and more often than not, he would not follow through. And so this young man came to my class on Monday mad. And because bullies are acting out of fear and control, he wanted to make somebody else mad. Now, his mother happened to work in the after-school program at the school, and so I had the opportunity to talk to her about her son whenever it was necessary, and it was necessary quite a bit. And I would go and talk to her, and we would try to come up with some plan and work together as a team to help him, because I would say to him, "You're not a bad kid. You're just making bad choices." And I remember the last day of that school year, and my students had left class, and this young man and his mom came into my room, and I told them that I was afraid. I was afraid that I could see his future, and it was not good. And I knew that the next year he'd be going to a different school for middle school, and I would not be there. And the people there might not take the time to figure out who he was and why he was doing what he was doing, and they would just label him a bad kid. And so I offered myself, and I said, next year, if you need me to talk to the principal or talk to the teacher, talk to the counselor, please reach out to me. I will do whatever I can. And sadly, I learned that my prediction had been true. He had a very difficult time in middle school. He had worse time in high school, and he was asked to leave high school. And then a couple of years went by. It was another last day of school. This time I'm teaching at a different school. I'm teaching second grade, and there's a knock at my door, and this young man enters my classroom with a huge grin on his face. And I'm so happy to see him. I said, "Why are you here?" And he tells me that his younger sister was being promoted from 5th grade at that school, and when he found out I was teaching second grade, he wanted to find me because he wanted to tell me something. And I said, "What did you want to tell me?" And he told me that he had gotten in with the wrong crowd and had been asked to leave high school, but he'd gone to the continuation school, he got his diploma. And then he was currently going to the local community college. He was hanging around different kids, he was making better choices, and he wanted to tell me that he was on the football team. And to let me know that they don't let you stay on the football team if you don't have good grades. And the reason he wanted to tell me this was because he remembered what I said. He remembered that I believed in him. And he told me one of the reasons he was still in school was because of me. Because you never know what they're going to remember. 5th grade was a dark year. I was not in Jeff's class. Jeff was in the fun class up the hall, the class where the door was always open and there was laughter coming out, and they watched movies and they did art. I had Mrs. Eunice McCorkle. And Mrs. McCorkle kept the desks in the same configuration for the entire school year, a row in the back, 2 columns, 2 shorter rows. And not only were the desks in the same configuration for the entire year, I had the same seat for the entire year. It was the worst seat in the classroom, all the way to the right. So for the entire school year, I had the same sideways view of the blackboard, the same view of the door that would open, the sunlight would come in, and the same view basically of the underside of the television. And it took me a while to come up with a theory as to why Mrs. McCorkle wanted me all the way over to the side. Mrs. McCorkle was the first teacher I had who had also had my older brother, Tim. Now, Tim is what teachers used to call the perfect student. I was not. And so I think every day I was a reminder to Mrs. McCorkle that I was not my brother Tim, so she wanted me as far in her peripheral vision as possible. And what that taught me was that when you've been teaching long enough to start teaching the siblings of your former students, you have to treat each one of them as individuals. You can't treat one as a reflection of another. You have to take the time to suss out their individual quirks and personalities and what they care about, because Tyler is not the same person as Savannah, who is not the same person as Jazzy, who is not the same person as Ella. In fact, there was one year in 5th grade, I had identical students in my class at the same time, and one of them did not like me. And the other one really didn't like me. 6th grade, Mr. Gilbert Young, my favorite elementary school teacher, his classroom was filled with art and creativity. We learned about art. We didn't just do art. We did paper mache, and we did batik, and we did weaving. And he taught something which I miss desperately: creative writing. Our class created their own magazine, Mimeograph, And in it were poems and stories and plays and funny epitaphs, cartoons. And he treated each one of us as individuals and got to really know who we were, which is why to this day I believe there are still a lot of active Mr. Young fan clubs out there, and rightfully so. Now, Jeff was back in my class, and Jeff and I came to a mutual decision in 6th grade. And we decided that girls were no longer terrible. And coincidentally, Jeff and I both had crushes on girls who also happened to be best friends. Now, did Mr. Young know this? I don't remember telling him. But I have a feeling he probably did, because something happened in class to make me think that he knew what was going on. There was a day where Jeff and I were sitting next to each other at a desk, and we were talking too much, and Mr. Young said, "That's it, you're being too disruptive." So we asked Jeff to move to the other side of the classroom to sit next to the girl he had a crush on, and the girl at the other side of the classroom who I had a crush on had to sit next to me. Now, I have to assume Mr. Young did this on purpose, and because he did that, I was able to go from not talking to a girl on the other side of the room to not talking to a girl right next to me. Middle school. 2 worst years of my life. Once again, I was the youngest and one of the shorter kids, and I got bullied and I got punched, and it was unpleasant. But I had a wonderful English teacher, Mrs. Gladys Roshko, same teacher for 7th and 8th grade, and she was miraculous. She taught me things that I used not only in high school and in college, but when I became a teacher and a writer and just in everyday life. She emphasized the wonder of root words and prefixes and suffixes, and she would give us assignments, and we were encouraged to do them creatively, uniquely, to view them from some other angle, and then she would put them up on the wall, and the walls were covered with art and words. And they didn't just stay up there for the whole school year. A bunch of them would come down and a bunch more would go up. And at the end of the school year, we had this incredible portfolio to take home that was evidence of all the creativity and the love of words that we had earned during that year. Mrs. Roshko was also the first teacher to demonstrate to me the teachable moment. We had English the first period after lunch. And one day I came upstairs after the bell rang, and there were a couple of students standing outside the classroom. That was unusual, because usually the door's open and we just go straight into Mrs. Roshko's class. But I waited outside with the other students. And then more students arrived, and they continued to wait, and then the next bell rang and more students arrived, and they continued to wait, and then the final bell rang, and we were confused because Mrs. Roshko had never been late before. And then the door opened, Mrs. Roshko exited from her classroom, let the door close behind her, and she looked at the class and she said, "Why are you all still standing out here?" Now someone said, not I, someone said, "We didn't think you were there." And Mrs. Roshko said, "Why didn't you think I was in my classroom?" And someone else said, "Because we thought the door was locked." And Mrs. Roshko said, "Did anybody try the door?" No. Nobody tried the door. Mrs. Roshko reached over, turned an unlocked door, opened it up, ushered us all inside to come in quickly and quietly and sit down, and she then gave us a lesson in blind obedience. Now, how successful was that lesson in blind obedience? That was over 40 years ago, and I'm still talking about it. And after that, I never assumed a classroom door was locked. Now, only one good thing happened to me in high school, and that was I met a girl who became my wife, and we've been married since 1987. I was not a good student. In fact, I was trouble, especially in science. And for 2 years, I had Mr. Duncan for science. And I would go to class, and Jeff, best friend Jeff, he would sit at the front of the class taking notes and listening. I sat at the back of the class with the other knuckleheads causing trouble, making wisecracks, not taking it seriously, laughing. And I would take the cord from the Venetian blind behind me and I would throw it up over the overhead light, knowing full well that at the end of the day, Mr. Duncan would have to climb up on the table and pull down that cord. I was awful. And years go by. My older brother Tim, celebrating his 50th birthday, and I look at the guest list and I see that someone has accepted the invitation, Mr. Duncan. And I think, finally, I'm going to have the opportunity to apologize to Mr. Duncan. I was actually looking forward to it. And when the day of the party arose, I scoped out looking for Mr. Duncan. I saw him across the room. I waited for an opportune moment, and then I walked up to him and I said, Mr. Duncan, Tim's younger brother Chris, I wanted to apologize to you. I know I was awful in your class. I know I was rude and disruptive, and now that I'm a teacher, I know that I made your job more difficult, and I just want to tell you I am so sorry, and I am so glad to be able to apologize to you today. And Mr. Duncan looked at me and he tilted his head and he said, I don't remember you. You never know what a teacher is going to forget. And now we come to the inspiration for this presentation. Do you remember when Facebook first started, before it was quite as evil as it is today, and you would get friend requests from all sectors of your life? Well, I got some friend requests from former students, and I had an ego, so I accepted them, so I was connected to some former students. Last year, in the middle of madness, in the middle of the pandemic, I got a message from a former student. Her name is Ashley. And she let me know that she graduated from UC Santa Barbara and she was preparing to take the MCAT to go to medical school. And she was having some trouble with the reading comprehension part of the test. And she remembered that when she was in 6th grade, she got a poor score on a comprehension test, and she cried in front of me. And I told her she was too young to care that much about a grade, and she just needed to breathe. Now, do I remember saying this to Ashley? I do not. Do I remember Ashley? Yes, I do. But something I said 10 years ago stayed with her, so she wanted to seek me out for help. And I helped her. We corresponded back and forth, and I tried to give her some tips, and she passed the test. She passed the MCAT. And then a month later, she contacted me again and said, now the medical schools are asking for secondary interviews. She applied to Harvard and USC and UC San Diego and Boston University, and she asked if I could help her with the essays. And I said, do you want help with proofreading or content? And she said both. And so I sat down and she would send me the documents, and I'll be honest, it was a lot of work, because I really went through carefully, and I would make suggestions and we would correspond back and forth, and I did what I could do to make them better, and she appreciated it. She sent me more essays and more essays. I think I ended up helping her with essays from about 20 schools, and it made me feel valued. And it made me feel like a teacher in a time where I needed to feel important and I needed to feel needed and wanted. And then, reading her essays, I realized she's an ideal candidate in any school. To be lucky, fortunate to have her going to their school. Now, am I telling you this story because it makes me seem successful? Of course I am. I'm telling this story to everybody. But the point is I did not pay special extra attention to Ashley 10 years ago because I thought sometime in the future she's going to need my help to get into medical school. No. I didn't give her extra special attention. I gave her special attention because I tried to give every student special attention, because you never know. You never know what student you're going to affect, and that effect you have on them is going to improve the quality of their life. And you, as educators, I know you are going to go through dark times and you're going to be sitting in your umpteenth meeting of the week wondering, why am I doing this? And you're going to sit at a desk with a stack of papers waiting to be graded, and you're going to say, why do I care more than they do? Why do I care more than their parents do? Why do I care more than anyone does? And then you wait, and years later, someone comes to contact you, and you find out it was all worth it. It was all worth it because they remembered. Now, to end my presentation, I would like you to hear a letter read by Ashley. Educators, it is my honor and my joy to present to you my former and forever student, Ashley.
Dear Chris, happy Monday. I'm writing this email with extreme excitement, joy, peace, and comfort. I wanted to share with you that I've been accepted to medical school. I've been blessed to interview at 10 schools, and I'm so happy that I heard back from one. The others are still pending. I received good news from the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health, located in Madison, Wisconsin. Thank you for everything, Mr. Reagan, honestly. I could have not written all of those primary and secondary applications if it was not for your feedback. Thank you for guiding me to articulate my thoughts and add feeling to my writing. Science sure does take that away after writing so many reports. Thank you for believing me as well since the 6th grade. I know it's been quite some time since 2007, but I remember so vividly everything you taught. From teaching us proper grammar and to not use double negatives, to teaching us what the R word really meant after a student used it in a manner to hurt someone. You've been a blessing in my life, and as I teach my twin brothers who are 9 years old, I use your lessons as guidance. They know all 50 states and are learning the capitals for each as well, breaking it down into regions just like you used to quiz us, and adding in the song too, which is still remembered by heart. It's very heartwarming to be able to share this with you. I'm happy that through technology we're able to stay connected, but you and your family continue to stay safe. This is only the beginning, and I hope to continue to make you proud. I'm very fortunate to have been your student. Sincerely, Ashley.